Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. A new venue for debt ceiling talks between House Republicans and President Biden, negotiators moving from the U.S. Capitol to the White House. But there are a few signs of a budget deal that the Republicans want to accompany a debt limit increase. And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen reiterating that the estimate is that without that increase, the U.S. will default and not be able to pay all of its obligations in early June. The U.S. House votes to block President Joe Biden's proposal to cancel up to $20,000 in student debt for those who took out federal loans. Sending the bill to the Senate, President Biden says he would veto it if it reaches his desk. The House fails to override the president's veto of a bill that would repeal the president's lifting of U.S. tariffs on solar panels from 4 Southeastern Asian nations if the panels are made with Chinese parts. President Joe Biden calling for more gun control measures on this anniversary of the mass shooting at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, that killed 19 students and 2 teachers. And Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis enters the race for president in 2024. And we start with the debt ceiling. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy saying at a news conference that he was sending House Republican negotiators to the White House to finish out debt limit talks, but also saying the two sides are still far apart. The Republicans want to cut federal spending as part of an agreement with President Biden to increase the debt ceiling, while the president and congressional Democrats do not.
I'm sending our negotiation team down to the White House to try to finish out the negotiations with the White House. There's a number of places that we are still far apart. I mean, it didn't seem like it'd be this hard. I remember even talking to the incoming Democratic leader before I was even Speaker about ways that we could work together on a debt ceiling. Hakeem told me he was going to follow the president's lead. I went down to meet with the president right after becoming Speaker, as you all know, on February 1st. I said, let's sit down, let's work together. The Democrats, they could have lifted the debt ceiling prior to me becoming Speaker. They knew the outcome of the election already. They knew we were taking power. They passed an omnibus bill, but they decided not to do the rising of the debt ceiling, even though they thought people should just raise it cleanly. Speaking with the president, I told him 2 things. We'll not raise taxes. Why? Because we got more revenue coming in to our coffers at any time in American history. The problem is the Democrats had been in power, and they increased the amount of spending to the highest level we've ever had at any time in American history, especially to GDP. And now we have the highest debt at any time to American history. So I just think it's common sense, it's reasonable, and it's rational that we spend less next year than we spend this year. Every household would do that.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, with reporters at the U.S. Capitol building. He also said that he promises the American people he and the Republicans will not give up trying to reach a deal with the president, and the country will not default on its debt, which would happen if the debt ceiling is not raised by, as the Treasury Department estimates, as early as June 1st. An article in Axios, Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, is calling on Speaker Kevin McCarthy to accept nothing less than steep cuts in debt ceiling negotiations. In a memo sent to House Republicans on Wednesday, Chip Roy, one of the most influential voices in the House Freedom Caucus, said it shouldn't be about a deal, it should be about saving the country. Again, that reporting from Axios. Speaker McCarthy at his news conference asked about the role and influence of the Freedom Caucus.
What do you say to those who believe you can't get to yes because so many members of your conference won't accept anything less than the bill you've already passed?
They're wrong. You underestimated me the whole time. The one thing you should learn from me, I will never give up for the American people. Those are the people I'm looking at. Can we get to yes? Yes. We passed the bill.
No Democrats. You need a bipartisan bill now. So you get to yes on a deal that will take Democrats.
Thank you, because you just identified the problem. No Democrats. So every Democrat voted against raising the debt ceiling. Nothing has happened in the Senate. I'm not a senator. I don't control the Senate. Why didn't they pass something? The president, he didn't talk to us for 97 days. So don't blame me for reaching out to the Democrats, for begging the president to meet with me or trying to find it. And don't blame us, Republicans, when we put a reasonable bill together that we actually took Democrats' ideas. So when we put spending for government and increase it 1% each year to cap it, so the slow of growth of government, so the economy can catch up, that was a Democrat idea. When we put work requirements in to help people get a job, that's something Senator Biden voted for and President Clinton signed into law. That was a Democrat supported idea too. So it's not my fault that the Democrats today have become so extreme, so far to the socialist wing, that they are now opposed to work requirements, that they are now opposed to saving $1 less than you spent the year before. That to me really seemed that the problem are the Democrats.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy at his news conference today on Capitol Hill. House Freedom Caucus member Chip Roy, Republican of Texas, was interviewed by talk show host Jesse Kelly Tuesday night.
As a result of the efforts in January, Speaker McCarthy's good faith efforts to work with all of us across the conference, we've been united on 2 battles so far. I hope now we will see it through in the debt ceiling fight, and I hope that we will see it through in the appropriations fight. Those are the negotiations going on right now within our conference. I don't care about the negotiations going on with the White House. Joe Biden doesn't even know where he is, much less give a crap about doing the right thing for the country. But we are having a debate within our own conference as Republicans about how much we should be holding the line. And my position is hold the damn line, right? The scene in Braveheart where he's screaming, hold the line. Stand up for the American people. They're tired of us cutting deals. They don't want any more swamp deals. They want a country that is not bankrupt. They want a country that doesn't have tyrants coming after them. They want a country that's not picking winners and losers and enriching fat cats over hardworking Americans. And I think we should stand up and do something about it right now.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, on the Jesse Kelly Show Tuesday night. White House negotiators Steve Ricchetti, Shalanda Young, and Louisa Terrell have been coming to the Capitol to meet with Republican negotiators. Congressman Patrick McHenry of North Carolina and Garrett Graves of Louisiana. Today, the meeting space moved to the White House. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her briefing said there's not much to read into the change of venue. Negotiations continue, and she said it's House Republicans' positions that are not acceptable to President Biden.
This is a manufactured crisis, plain and simple. That's what we're seeing currently. That's what we've been dealing with for the past couple of weeks, a manufactured crisis. And don't take our word for it. Just listen to members of the House Freedom Caucus. They've been very honest about this and are now openly, they're saying the quiet thing out loud, referring to the full faith and credit of the United States as a hostage. But I do want to be clear here. Averting default is the responsibility of every single member of Congress. Think about what's at stake here. And that's what we've been doing. We've been laying out for weeks, for months, what is at stake. A default would have catastrophic impacts in every single part of this country, whether you're in a red state or in a blue state. It doesn't matter. Every single part of the country. We're talking about millions of jobs lost, devastated retirement accounts, and a recession. We've also heard some House Republicans refer to preventing default as the only concession they are willing to make. But preventing a catastrophic default is not a concession, it's their job, period. And let's be clear about what Republicans are demanding in exchange for doing their job and preventing a default. Earlier this year, they put forward an extreme package of devastating cuts that would slash support for education, law enforcement, food assistance. The list goes on and on and on and on. By what now would be about 30%. That is not at all what the American people want. That is not what they deserve. That is not what they're asking for. And the president has made clear, he's made this very clear, that that is not happening on his watch. House Republicans have said we need to make these cuts in the name of fiscal responsibility and deficit reduction. But that's not what this is about. That's never been what this is about for them. Because even as they fight to gut investments in hardworking families, they want to turn around and protect tax breaks skewed to the wealthy and corporations. And guess what? Just last week, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office said those tax cuts would add $3.5 trillion to the debt over the next decade. And don't forget this. It was under President Trump, the last president, not President Biden, that America's debt increased by 40%. Again, by 40% under the last president.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her briefing today at the White House. On Capitol Hill, all 213 House Democrats have now signed a discharge petition to force a floor vote on legislation to increase the debt ceiling, the so-called clean increase. But 218, a majority of the House, is needed in order for that to happen, so 5 Republicans would now need to sign. House Democrats also holding news conference. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, is chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, whose membership is about half the total Democratic caucus. In her opening statement, she used the same phrase that Republican Congressman Chip Roy had used in his interview that we aired a few minutes ago, hold the line, and also spoke about House Republicans' unwillingness to consider new revenue to reduce the budget deficit.
And I'm so proud to be joined by our strong leaders from across our Progressive Caucus, 102 members strong, that have been holding the line in making sure we don't get a bad deal for the American people. Today, the United States is closer to default than we have ever been in our history for one reason and one reason only. That is extreme Republican recklessness that will crash our economy. And let me be clear, Republicans have no interest in cutting the deficit. They are willing to crash the economy because they want to continue their extreme tax cuts for the wealthiest corporations and billionaires across the country. And guess what? They want you, working people, to finance those tax cuts for the wealthiest. The Progressive Caucus is here to sound the alarm about the harm and catastrophe that will befall working families if Republicans are successful. Please understand, none of this is normal and it shouldn't be treated as such. Congress has raised the debt ceiling 78 times since 1960, 49 under Republican presidents and 29 under Democratic presidents. Spending is negotiated during the budget. That is appropriate. That is the appropriations process. But raising the debt ceiling is separate to implementing what Congress has already passed. It is a constitutional obligation, and it is essential to protecting people's pensions, health care, and Social Security. Driving us all off the default cliff is bad enough in and of itself. But let's call out why they're sowing this chaos and catastrophe. President Biden and Democrats have put forward very clear proposals to cut the deficit. But Republicans' posturing has nothing to do with that. Why won't they discuss raising revenue? Why won't they reverse their deficit exploding, unfunded Trump tax cuts, which added nearly $2 trillion to the deficit, with nearly half of the benefits benefiting the top 5%? Why won't they cut the bloated defense budget? Because it is not actually about debt or deficit. It is about keeping the cash flowing to the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations.
Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Democrat from Washington State, chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, at a news conference today with other caucus members. New York Times article begins. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Wednesday that it was almost certain that the United States would not have enough cash to continue to pay all of its bills on time beyond early June, and that she would soon provide Congress with a more precise update about when the nation could default if the debt limit was not raised. The Treasury Secretary reiterated her warning that a default would inflict severe damage on the U.S. economy and made the case that she would be left with no good options to contain the fallout. That from the New York Times. The Secretary spoke at a Wall Street Journal CEO Council event.
What I said in the letter is that it's highly likely that we would run out of resources to meet all the government's obligations in early June, and possibly as early as June 1st. So we no longer see very much likelihood that our resources will enable us to get to the middle or end of June So sometime in early June, and I'll be updating Congress again shortly, seems like when we will really run out of resources.
When will you be able to give some more detail and some more precision on how you're arriving at that estimate? It hasn't been more precise than sort of likely or highly likely. Is there more precision that you can give people?
I will plan to update Congress shortly and try to increase the level of precision. There's a lot of uncertainty about government payments and receipts, even a few weeks out, and it's hard to be precise about exactly which day we will run out of resources. But early June seems almost certain that we will not be able to get past early June, and I do intend to provide an update pretty soon.
The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen at a conference today held by the Wall Street Journal CEO Council. On Wall Street, the Dow down 255, Nasdaq down 75, S&P down 30. The U.S. House has voted today to reverse President Biden's student debt forgiveness plan. The plan would forgive up to $20,000 in student debt for those who used Pell Grants and met income thresholds under $125,000 a year for individuals and under $250,000 a year for married couples or heads of household. For those not using Pell Grants, forgiveness would be $10,000. Plan is currently on hold because there's a pending Supreme Court case. On the House floor, the sponsor of the congressional bill to reverse the plan, Congressman Bob Goodlatte, Republican from Virginia.
The principle of this resolution, nullifying President Biden's student loan transfer scheme, was one of the key provisions of the Limit, Save, Grow Act, saving $315 billion by simply asking Americans to honor their commitment to pay back their own student loans will help us to get our country's spending under control. Student loan borrowers are responsible for the debt they incurred, and Congress is responsible for the $32 trillion that we have spent. House Republicans take that seriously, which is why a month ago we passed a plan to responsibly raise the debt limit while providing historic savings for the American people. I invite Representative Pelosi and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to stand by her word and vote with me today in favor of this resolution to nullify President Biden's student loan transfer scheme. Congress must reclaim its power and act today to stop the unilateral action of President Biden that is exacerbating the higher education financial crisis. Additionally, my resolution will do what should have been done a long time ago: end the student loan repayment pause that has already cost taxpayers $195 billion.
Congressman Bob Goodlatte, Republican from Virginia, on the House floor. Opposing this resolution to overturn the president's student loan forgiveness plan, Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat from Washington State.
President Biden's loan forgiveness plan helps a lot of borrowers with debt but no degree. Many are borrowers who were defrauded by their schools or who had to take on other responsibilities and couldn't complete their education. And the president's plan directs 90%, let me repeat, 90% of relief to borrowers earning less than $75,000 per year. This may be news to my colleagues who continue to misrepresent that student debt relief will be a bailout for the rich. It's not. Another fact, because of interest capitalization and negative amortization, many student loan borrowers who are current on their payments still have loan balances that are the same as or even greater when they first took out their loan. That's unfair. But beyond the numbers, we must humanize who will be hurt the most if we allow this CRA to pass. Our nation's teachers in red and blue districts who work with students every day. Healthcare workers and first responders in red and blue districts who keep our communities safe and healthy. Caregivers in red and blue districts who support the work of raising and sustaining families. Our nation's small business owners in red and blue districts who make communities vibrant and unique. I urge my colleagues to show some humanity, compassion, and empathy. Let's pass good faith policies that make college more affordable and recognize the intrinsic value of opportunity and possibility in every American.
Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, Democrat from Washington State, on the House floor. The House passed this bill, by a vote of 218 to 203. Mostly party line, 2 Democrats joining the Republicans in voting yes. It sends it to the Senate. President Biden has threatened to veto if it passes there and is sent to him. You heard a reference to CRA. That's the Congressional Review Act. It's the process by which Congress can look at regulations and vote to overturn them. House today also failed to override a presidential veto on a bill that would cancel the president's pause on tariffs on solar panels imported from Cambodia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam that use parts and components manufactured in China. President Biden, in his veto message, writing, "We cannot afford to create new uncertainty for American businesses and workers in the solar industry. We can and must strengthen our energy security by maintaining our focus on expanding U.S. capacity that is ready to come online as this temporary bridge concludes in June 2024. Some debate on the House floor today on the veto override. Here's Congresswoman Carol Miller, Republican from West Virginia.
The Biden administration is allowing the Communist Chinese Party to outmaneuver us at every step, even rewarding them by vetoing bipartisan legislation that puts America first. Letting Chinese solar companies cheat directly handicaps U.S. solar manufacturers and puts America at a disadvantage. Washington Democrats and the Biden administration have been in lockstep with China since they entered the White House. It baffles me that the administration is so quick to put America last to help China succeed. We need a strategic decoupling from China. Everyone in the United States should be focused on countering Chinese influence by bringing jobs back to America and implementing solid trade agreements with our allies. It's imperative that we override this veto.
Congresswoman Carol Miller, Republican from West Virginia, on the House floor. On the other side of the debate, Congressman Mike Thompson, Democrat from California.
I share my colleagues' goal of ensuring that our trade laws are fairly enforced. And I certainly share our collective goal of promoting domestic manufacturing and jobs. But if this bill were to become law, if the president's veto were to be overridden, it would cost, not create, American jobs. And in the long run, it would make it harder, not easier, for our country to become energy independent. This bill would make it impossible to deploy solar energy quickly enough throughout the United States. It would undercut the climate change investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in fighting climate change in the history of our country. We all want solar products manufactured right here at home. But in the short run, our domestic industry can't increase production rapidly enough to meet demand or to meet our climate goals.
Congressman Mike Thompson, Democrat from California, on the House floor. The House went on to vote and failed to override the president's veto on this bill that would have reversed his lifting temporarily of the tariffs on those imported solar panels from 4 Southeast Asian countries when components were made in China. The House vote was 214 to 205, short of the 2/3 vote needed to override a presidential veto. It was mostly party line, Republicans voting yes, Democrats no, but 8 Republicans crossed over and voted no. Democrats, there were 8 yeses there. A story from the Washington Times. The Biden administration's proposed gas stove efficiency rules were placed on the front burner Wednesday as House lawmakers sparred over potential regulations that have Department of Energy officials laying low. The House Oversight Committee and the Chamber's Energy and Commerce Committee held hearings centered on opposing new regulations on the popular appliance used by roughly 40% of U.S. households that's at the center of a culture war. Again, that reporting from the Washington Times. C-SPAN covered the House Oversight Subcommittee hearing. Here's the chair, Congressman Pat Fallon, Republican from Texas, questioning witness Matthew Agan, Chief Counsel of Energy and Regulations at the American Gas Association.
Mr. Agan, you just heard Mr. Delansky say that if this rule goes into effect, there's still going to be a wide variety of gas stoves available for consumers. Do you agree with that statement?
No, like he even said, they're going to wipe out 50% of the market. 50% of the market will not comply with DOE's proposed rule. That is a substantial amount of gas cooktops. Of the higher-end cooktops, professional-grade cooking products, about 96% will be wiped out. So a large chunk of the desirable products with the features that people are looking for will be wiped out, and that will all go all the way down into the mid-range to low-range product as well.
But Mr. Agin, they said this is not a ban. My colleague said it wasn't a ban. We have a witness that says it wasn't a ban. So is it not a ban?
Basically, it's going to amount to just having a lot fewer choices, and it really be effectively be a ban in the sense that
so a de facto ban.
You basically will. Okay. It's an indirect way of banning gas.
So over-regulating it, regulating to such a degree that it is in effect pretty much a ban, except for the 4% that already comply.
Right.
So the 96%, you're kind of out of luck.
You will get the choice that you probably don't want at the store, basically.
A choice for consumers. Right. Choice, interesting. Okay. Can you explain the versatility and performance of gas stoves compared to electric stoves? Because I love gas stoves. In fact, I was just talking to counsel. He's looking for a house. He wouldn't even buy a house unless it had a gas stove. And I tend to agree. And if I go to a place like a VRBO and they have a gas stove, I get excited. Right. It's just me, anecdotal, but you go ahead.
No, so gas stoves obviously are very versatile and have features that people want. The important thing is obviously people like having the immediate control over the flame, being able to control the cooking temperature, being able to react quickly. Temperatures can go up and down, and then also cooking a variety of products. If you're looking to cook on a high heat or sear, you can do meat or vegetables in that way. Looking to boil a large amount of pasta or any kind of rice, it basically makes it more efficient to do cooking. And also these cooking products are actually not just used for residential purposes. If you're a small business working at your home, it provides that level of versatility that allows you to work in your home business and get things done in that fashion.
Matthew Agin is with the American Gas Association, Chief Counsel of Energy and Regulations. Question by Congressman Pat Fallon, Republican from Texas, chair of the Oversight Subcommittee on Economic Growth, Energy Policy, and Regulatory Affairs. You heard a reference at the beginning of that clip from the congressman to Mr. Delasky. That's Andrew Delasky, another witness. He's executive director of the Appliance Standards Awareness Project. Here is his answers to the questions from the subcommittee ranking Democrat Cori Bush of Missouri.
Think about my colleague says he likes gas stoves. I like gas stoves. We all like gas stoves. Seatbelts work too because there are standards put in place to keep people safe. This is a standard. We're talking about keeping people safe, and I like people to be alive, not necessarily what looks like a way to weaponize or to politicize an appliance. Let's keep people safe. So scientific research has proven there is a direct connection between gas stoves and let's just take childhood asthma, finding that gas stoves are linked to 1 in 8 childhood asthma cases. These findings are especially concerning considering that asthma disproportionately affects Black and brown communities, like whole communities of people, humans. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 13.4% of Black children have asthma, while only 7.8% of white children have asthma. New mothers heating up bottles or making pancakes could be poisoning their children without their knowledge. We want to keep them safe. This evidence linking gas stove emissions to negative health outcomes, it continues to grow. Gas stoves rely on natural gas or methane as a fuel source, which affects both the climate, both as fossil fuel source and as a greenhouse gas itself. So, Mr. Delasky, how does using natural gas as a fuel source contribute to the climate crisis?
Burning natural gas in our homes and in our power plants is a significant contributor to climate change emissions, and it's also a significant contributor to air quality challenges and problems indoors and outdoors. And making our stoves more efficient would reduce combustion and reduce the emissions coming from our stoves.
Okay, Mr. Delasky, would improving the efficiency of gas stoves, would that help reduce the impact on the climate crisis?
Absolutely. Improving the efficiency of our gas stoves would help.
Andrew Delaski, Executive Director of the Appliance Standards Awareness Project, questioned by Congresswoman Cori Bush, ranking Democrat on the Oversight Subcommittee that held today's hearing. You can find the full video of the hearing at our website at cspan.org. An article on foxbusiness.com about the hearing has this: Republicans invited 2 senior Energy Department officials to testify regarding the administration's controversial policies, but neither accepted the invitation. During the hearing, Congressman Byron Donalds, Republican from Florida, called the officials' absence highly disrespectful. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Live Thursday on C-SPAN Radio. At 9 a.m. Eastern, a House Natural Resources Subcommittee holds a hearing on President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget request for the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Office of Insular Affairs. Witnesses will be senior officials at the Interior Department. That's live Thursday at 9 a.m. on C-SPAN Radio. Listen anywhere on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is running for the Republican Party nomination for president in 2024. He filed the paperwork today. The Tallahassee Democrat newspaper writes that it comes after months of anticipation, and Governor DeSantis is launching a campaign that will lean heavily on culture war battles and a contrarian COVID-19 record that brought him national attention and made Florida a leading laboratory for conservative governing, and that it also puts him on a collision course with another candidate for president, former President Donald Trump, who began attacking him months ago. And that from the Tallahassee Democrat. Governor DeSantis discussing his entry into the race in a live online program tonight with Twitter CEO Elon Musk. Today, his Political Action Committee, Never Back Down, put out this video.
There's nothing special about being American. None of you can define for me what an American is.
Can't escape this kind of inflation.
People keep getting shot. Record-breaking year of border crossings.
America has fallen.
We did it, Joe.
Who will stand? From a family of steelworkers.
Steel builds our nation.
Ron DeSantis served our nation.
When the world went mad, we stood as the citadel of freedom. Freedom is here to stay.
And stood for what was right.
We chose facts over fear. We chose education over indoctrination. We weathered the storm. We fight the woke in the schools. We fight the woke in the corporations. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. We will be courageous, and we will never back down.
Ron DeSantis for president. Never Back Down, Inc. is responsible for the contents of this advertising.
The Political Action Committee, Never Back Down, putting out that video today, the same day that Governor DeSantis filed his paperwork and is officially a candidate for president in 2024. An article at CNN, Donald Trump and his allies are planning a coordinated effort to upend the media cycle around the presidential campaign launch of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, which will include a video featuring the former president addressing his rival's entrance into the race and a social media blitz leaning on high-profile Trump-aligned conservative commentators, sources familiar with the plans, told CNN. Democratic President Joe Biden, who's also running for re-election, is calling on Congress to pass additional measures to deal with what he calls an epidemic of gun violence. Today is the anniversary of the mass shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, in which 19 children and 2 teachers died. President Biden was joined by First Lady Jill Biden at the White House.
We still need to ban, in my view, AR-15 firearms, assault weapons, once again. You know, they've been used time and again in mass killings of innocent children and people. We need to ban high-capacity magazines, the ability to shoot 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 bullets without reloading. Because today, guns remain the number one killer of children in America, guns. And over the last year since Uvalde, our country has experienced a staggering 650 mass shootings. And it's hard to say, well over 40,000 deaths due to gun violence. We can't end this epidemic until Congress pass some common sense gun safety laws to keep weapons of war off our streets and out of the hands of dangerous people. Until states do the same thing. How many more parents will live their worst nightmare before we stand up to the gun lobby to establish universal background checks, establish a national red flag laws, require safe storage of firearms, and end immunity from liability for gun manufacturers? The only major corporate entity that doesn't have that's immune to liability. Even a majority of responsible gun owners support these common sense actions to save lives and keep our community safe. So it's time to act. It's time to act. It's time to make our voices heard, not as Democrats or as Republicans, but as friends, as neighbors, as parents, as fellow Americans. And I'm being deadly earnest when I say that.
President Biden at the White House, standing beside him, the First Lady Jill Biden, and behind them, 21 tall white candles representing the 21 victims at the Uvalde Elementary School shooting 1 year ago, 19 children and 2 teachers. Spectrum News 1 in New York reports that the Uvalde school shooting a year ago came just 10 days after a gunman killed 10 people at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. And, quote, both shootings led to the passage of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first major gun safety legislation signed into law in decades. The law toughens background checks for the youngest gun buyers, provides funding for states to enhance crisis prevention programs, and puts in place so-called red flag laws, which allow authorities to take firearms away from people determined to be dangerous, criminalize straw purchases, and arms trafficking. That from Spectrum News 1 in New York. And as you heard President Biden say, he's calling for additional measures now. This is Washington Today. From Associated Press, in Kyiv, Ukraine, the head of the Russian private army Wagner has again broken with the Kremlin line on Ukraine, saying its goal of demilitarizing the country has backfired, acknowledging Russian troops have killed civilians and agreeing with Western estimates that he's lost more than 20,000 men in the battle for Bakhmut. Question about this today to John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, on a teleconference.
And first we're going to go to Amar Madhani from AP. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you about the Prigozhin estimates that 20,000 Wagner forces have been killed in fighting in Bakhmut. Estimate is roughly in line with what you briefed a few weeks ago, but bleaker on the death count. One, does the administration think that the Prigozhin number is accurate, and do you guys have any updated estimate of your own? And just what do you read into Prigozhin seeming to be so blunt about the costs of war to Wagner, and it's really in great contrast with the Russian official numbers? Thank you.
Yeah, hey, on your first question, Amr, you're right. I mean, that estimate largely tracks with what we briefed to you not long ago, almost precisely. I would note that was, a couple of weeks ago or so. So it's likely that in the days following us relaying that number, that they suffered additional casualties. And I mean, just the main takeaway is that this offensive in Bakhmut has just come at a terribly high cost to Russia. And as I said, it's been a bit of a meat grinder for them. As for why he decided to do this, I mean, I wouldn't begin to pretend to get inside Mr. Prigozhin's head. That said, I mean, since almost the beginning of the fighting in Bakhmut, he has publicly upbraided their defense ministry and accused them of not supporting him. He has made entreaties for more ammunition and for manpower, and castigated the Russian Ministry of Defense for not taking the fight seriously in Bakhmut or supporting him in his efforts. And it's possible that this could be a sort of morbid way of him claiming credit for whatever they've been able to achieve in what they've achieved in Bakhmut, but also trying to publicly embarrass the Ministry of Defense further. That the cost was borne in blood and in treasure by Wagner and not by the Russian military. But again, that's speculation on my part, and we don't really know exactly what's in his brain on any given day.
John Kirby is Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council at the White House, taking reporters' questions today on a teleconference. Story from Reuters. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder of the Wagner mercenary group, warned that Russia could face a revolution similar to those of 1917 and lose the conflict in Ukraine unless the elite got serious about fighting the war. Another Reuters story, the Kremlin said on Wednesday the use of U.S.-made military hardware by pro-Ukrainian fighters who conducted a raid on a Russian border region this week was testament to the West's growing involvement in the Ukraine conflict. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matt Miller was asked by a reporter if the photos released by Russia, allegedly showing U.S. military vehicles like Humvees at the battle site, were accurate.
Matt, hi. Are you able to say anything more on the Kremlin accusation that U.S.-made military hardware by pro-Ukrainian fighters were used on this raid in the Russian border region? Kirby talked a little bit about it, but I wondered if you got any updates from yesterday and further to him.
I'll say that we are looking into the reports. We've obviously seen the reports by media organizations over the last 24 hours or so. As a general policy matter, we have been clear that we don't support the use of U.S.-made equipment being used for attacks inside of Russia, and we're looking into the reports, but we have not reached any conclusions at this time.
Do you anticipate when you might reach conclusions based on what you've seen on the investigation so far?
I wouldn't want to prejudge either the outcome or when we'll reach that outcome, other than to say we're looking into it now and don't yet have any verified conclusions.
Follow on that.
Yeah.
Yesterday you articulated some skepticism about this equipment. Does that skepticism remain, or are you sort of more or less inclined in a given direction?
So what I will say is, again, that we're looking into the reports. When I made the remarks I did yesterday, they were based on the images that we had seen circulating on social media, some of which we did have a great deal of skepticism about. Since then, there have obviously been media reports with additional images. We are looking into those reports, but as I said, we have not yet reached any conclusions about them.
State Department spokesperson Matt Miller at his news conference in Washington. From ABC News, in his first televised public remarks since the pandemic, Chief Justice John Roberts defended the integrity of the Supreme Court in the face of slumping public approval and growing political pressure after a recent barrage of misconduct allegations. The ABC News article continues. The American Law Institute Gala, at which the Chief Justice was awarded the Henry J. Friendly Medal for contributions to the law, marked the first time Chief Justice Roberts directly addressed growing concern about how the justices handle potential conflicts of interest with their personal lives, a topic that has gotten renewed attention amid a series of alleged ethical infringements by Justice Clarence Thomas. Again, that from ABC News. Chief Justice Roberts did not indicate what additional steps the court would take on this issue. He spoke Tuesday night.
In 18 years, I'm asked, well, what was the hardest decision I had to make in 18 years? Was it this First Amendment case? Was it that death penalty case? Was it some major separation of powers case? None of those. The hardest decision I had to make was whether to erect fences and barricades around the Supreme Court. I had no choice but to go ahead and do it. But while it was going on, while the fences were going up, I kept hearing Charles Evans Hughes's remarks at the opening of the Supreme Court building. He said, "The Republic endures, and this is the symbol of its faith." But inside the court, there's cause for optimism. I am happy that I can continue to say that there has never been a voice raised in anger in our conference room. Our court consists of 9 appointees by 4 presidents. We deal with some of the most controversial issues before the country, yet we maintain collegial relations with each other. When I wander down the halls and see a colleague, I am always happy to have the chance to chat. Now, to be fair, there are many days where I don't feel like walking down the halls, so you may have to discount that a little bit. And on a final issue of concern inside the court, I want to assure people that I am committed to making certain that we as a court adhere to the highest standards of conduct. We are continuing to look at things we can do to give practical effect to that commitment. And I am confident there are ways to do that that are consistent with our status as an independent branch of government under the Constitution's separation of powers.
Chief Justice John Roberts at the American Law Institute Gala at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. Tuesday night, the Institute giving the Chief Justice an award. A Marquette Law School poll released last week finds the Supreme Court's approval rating with the American public is 41%, with 25% expressing a great deal of confidence in the Supreme Court. White House Domestic Policy Advisor Susan Rice, who has been in that position since President Biden's first day in office, January 2021, is stepping down at the end of this week. She was interviewed today by Washington Post Associate Editor Jonathan Capehart.
It's been reported that you don't want to be the next president of the Brookings institutions. Okay, you're saying no. All right, that's a confirmation.
No, I'm just saying it's been reported. This is urban legend. But anyway, I am. Okay. I love the Brookings Institution. I was honored to serve there as a scholar. My mother was a scholar there.
Right.
But I have not had any in-depth or serious conversations about being the president of Brookings. And for me, my only certainty is that I want to take some time away, enjoy my family, travel, have a great summer, and then maybe in the fall, I'll be willing to think about what I want to do next.
Oh, okay, because that's where that question was going. So what would be the perfect next gig?
I have no idea. And that's what's so exciting about this next chapter. Not only do I not know, I'm not trying to figure it out right away. I really want to just take some time, decompress. I served Jonathan 8 years of the Clinton administration, 8 years of the Obama administration, 2.5 years in this administration, which has been an extraordinary privilege with an extraordinary team at the Domestic Policy Council. I've loved every minute of it. I've loved serving President Biden and getting to serve our country again. But I'm looking forward to some time with family, friends, and just sort of thinking about, at this stage of my life and my career, what does make sense next? And I'm not trying to answer that question anytime soon.
Okay, well then I've got one last question for you. It is the most important question because in your book, In Tough Love, you write about your love of a good dance party. So how soon after you leave the White House will you have a dance party?
Well, first of all, I'm having one before I leave the White House. We'll have a little going away before I leave, and like all my parties, there's going to have to be some music, and I will be very surprised if that doesn't lead to some righteous dancing. And then afterwards, we'll talk about what comes next. But I will have more time to plan parties than I currently do. That's the good news.
Susan Rice, the White House Domestic Policy Advisor, interviewed by Washington Post Associate Editor Jonathan Capehart. They also talked about many issues that Susan Rice has dealt with over the past couple of years. You can find the video at cspan.org. Susan Rice's last day is Friday. She was, under the Obama administration, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and White House National Security Advisor. And under the Bill Clinton administration, she had various staff positions on the National Security Council and then became Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. President Biden has announced that the current White House Senior Advisor, Neera Tanden, will be the next domestic policy advisor. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word emailed to you every day by signing up for our evening newsletter. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we're taking your calls, live, on the air, on the news of the day, and we'll discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Thursday morning, Republican presidential candidate Asa Hutchinson joins us to talk about his 2024 presidential bid. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Thursday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion with your phone calls, Facebook comments, text messages, and tweets.